Ask any questions, but give me a chance to repeat the question so everybody can hear it. So, Bonnie, what are you hoping to get done in the next 45 minutes?
So I'm hoping to start decorating this jug. I've got some bits that I'm going to be inspired from, so I'm going to do a bit of drawing, working that out, and then I'll transfer that onto the jug itself.
Lovely. And Rich, what are you going to do?
Well, surprise, surprise, Ingrid, I'm going to be making a crown.
Oh.
Just thought I'd mix it up a bit, you know.
Good. And obviously, feel free to ask anything that you want to ask. So, yeah, crack on and talk us through what you're doing.
I almost feel like we need an on your marks, get set.
Yeah. So, just for a show of hands, how many people were here yesterday for Bonnie's? Okay, and how many people were here yesterday for Rich? Oh, all new jokes then, folks. All new jokes needed.
You can relax today then. Tell them what you really think.
Yeah.
Somebody will ask you to move that bag.
Oh, yeah, we'll have to move your old wash bag again.
Oh,
right?
yes, my wash bag. I quite like that in the last few days, this is the third studio I've had. It's amazing. It's really kind of...
Oh, you're getting to try all the different spaces to make it.
Yeah, completely. Should be doing something in response to the space, really.
And how have you both found the festival so far?
Sorry?
How have you both found the festival so far?
Busy.
Oh, I've found it absolutely thrilling. I mean, you can't help but be enthused, really, by being amongst so many potters and creative people. I think there's something, just energizing about it. In fact, I was just saying, actually, somebody was saying to me yesterday, oh, you must be feeling drained. And it's like, no, actually, I'm feeling nearly full. I find it a really nourishing, filling experience, being with everybody and just kind of, because I've got the silence and the quiet when I'm on my own in the studio.
It's been amongst your tribe. And how about you, Bonnie? How have you found it?
Busy, yeah. It's been brilliant to be around people asking questions and because normally, like you say, normally just by myself, kind of thinking, is this good? So for people asking questions, it's been brilliant. Yeah.
Right. Good.
So behave yourself.
Yeah. So the question is, it's not the same pot. This one you made on
Friday, yeah, so I can make them quite quick. So Friday morning I made this one. It's been drying out over the weekend. But the one I did make yesterday and had a bit of a tumble on, I have attached her handle and she is on my table in the demonstrator's tent. So you can see her. She's still got a couple of dents, but that's part of it.
Are all your pots female?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they're all hers. Sometimes if they don't turn out right, then they're a he. But the good ones, they're a she.
Do you have genders for your pots over there, Rich?
No, mine are more like naughty children. I'm trying to get through, trying to get them to school or something, and they keep fighting back a lot of the time. But then they end up hopefully being lovely, lovely individuals. But, a bit like parenting, you never really know whether your intervention is a good thing or a bad thing.
Oh, question there. Oh, yes, Rich, there you go. Why do you make
Why
crowns?
the crowns? So, I talked a bit about it yesterday, but, I think it's... I can talk a bit more about it today, I guess. But I think it's partly the fact that I grew up in a military household. My dad was in the Marines, my mum was in the army. Had fierce pride in kind of. I think if you're essentially putting yourself forward to fight for king, queen of country, you kind of have to kind of buy into the monarchy as an institution. And I was kind of taught to take pride in that as well. But it was that, the fact that then when I went out into society, I was told that really the sort of monarchy and that sort of aspect of British society wasn't for me. And I didn't see, in the upper echelons of society, anybody that kind of I could kind of relate to, particularly back then. You looked at kind of media, you looked around the kind of what was around, and it was the black people were the down and outs, the thieves, the robbers, the people that were less than human. I mean, it's quite early for this kind of subject matter, I'm aware, but yeah, so it's partly that kind of using it as part of a narrative, as part of a historical narrative, but also as part of a personal narrative. So I kind of use them in that sense, but then equally, the actual physical history that directly relates to my heritage. So, the Royal East Africa Company, they started it all. They had a monopoly for many years over the transatlantic slave trade. And whether, however comfortable anybody feels with talking about that's responsible for half of my heritage. So, it's kind of a lot of the research I've done to kind of understand my role in society and kind of why I experienced what I did growing up has kind of, all routes lead back to that. So, yeah.
And you were saying yesterday you've been listening to that amazing podcast, Empire. It's fantastic.
William Dalrymple, Anita Anand are just doing such vital work. And I think what I love about them is that they do it in such a joyous and light-hearted way. They're dealing with some incredibly confrontational subject matter, and yet they do it with such grace, in such a light-hearted human way, because they're presenting fact. So yeah, if you haven't listened to it, listen to it. I mean, you've got to be prepared to be in for the long haul, because
it's long.
Lots of episodes. But I would recommend going through it in order, because it starts with the East Africa Company, purely because of the context that lies at the heart of the presenters. William Dalrymple, who is an author, a historian, his family and himself, they were based in India, so he grew up in India, British, but grew up in India. And Anita Anand, who is Indian, but has been raised in the UK. Her heritage is Indian, but born and raised in the UK. So, I think it's just a really super interesting, they have interesting conversations, but they present historical facts. And, I think that could be a historical curriculum as part of the education system. And it would be
I take my students to India every year, and that is required listening before they go.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's BBC Sounds, available on BBC Sounds. So
yeah, listen to it. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah.
You just realise how complex and how, long-standing these histories are. And, we're just a mere blink of an eye as part of that, But hopefully some of the things I make will hang around so that the archaeologists of tomorrow won't just be digging up Coke cans and plastic bottles.
And that's a kind of interesting thing about ceramics, I suppose, for both of you. Do you feel you're making the kind of archaeological finds of the future?
I have never thought of that.
I did a project with the students recently. They come and do a trip to our studio in France, and they had to make future fossils because it's an 800-year-old property, and they have to make work to basically be buried there for discovery in hundreds of years' time. And what it says about their identity and contemporary culture. And it's a really interesting thing to think about when we're here making these contemporary objects in the lineage of millennia of material culture, that, how are we going to be judged by the objects we're making now, isn't it? Which is fascinating. Especially when you think about the material and cultural heritage of Welsh ceramics and what you're doing.
For me, it's quite funny because I work from historical pieces for me to think, maybe I'll be a historical piece at some point. And it's quite strange since I'm taking it from already history,
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly found, turning 5-6 tons of clay a month into tiles, producing loads and loads of stuff does make you aware of the legacy you're leaving behind. And makes you aware of the responsibility we have as makers. And I would say I'd remove kind of the process of learning out of that, because obviously you do have to learn from your mistakes. But I think once you're, aware and conscious of what you're making, you do have a responsibility to use the material in a conscious way. I mean, I think that's what's been so special about having the sustainability conversation here this year, because I think, as makers, it's not a finite resource. We have to be conscious about how we use the material.
Yeah.
Question? That's greenware that you're working on. That's
Yeah, it's a bit wetter
Is it
than.
completely dry? Has it been?
No, it's. I would normally have it a bit drier, or I would paint on bisque.
And what are you using for your painting medium?
I'm using underglazes because you can use them.
Just straight onto greenware.
Yeah, you can
underglaze.
put them onto greenware or you can put them onto bisque. So because my handles are quite fragile, I don't always paint on greenware because I handle them quite a bit. But for today I am. But yeah, normally I fire it and then I'll paint onto it and then I'll glaze it afterwards. Because then when it's bisqued, I can use my ceramic pencils and kind of have pencil marks on my work as well, which you can't do on greenware.
These are quite technical questions you might want to take up in the studio. But the question is, do you biscuit fire your underglazes before glazing, or you did that and then it becomes a problem?
Yeah, after it's been fired, when you come to put your transparent glaze on, do you find that you have a problem with that not?
Does the transparent glaze then peel off your biscuited stuff if you do that?
No, so I'll do 3 layers of the underglazes, but I do find, because I fire my glaze up to 1,240, I think, so like the reds will burn off and the colours do change quite significantly.
Is that an answer question?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
These are velvet underglazes as well. I don't know if you've used those specific velvet underglazes. They're very good.
Yeah, a lot of the things they call stains or underglazes or on glazes, you can almost use them interchangeably quite often. It's worth a try anyway. There's a question.
Question? What's your process, Bonnie, from translating from 2D to 3D?
So I can't think in 3D. It just doesn't fit in my brain. So when I'm drawing, obviously, I'm looking at a jug flat on. So, like, that part of the jug doesn't exist in my brain. So I kind of, I use templates to build and then pinch and hope they stay together. So all my designs, because I did surface pattern as my master's, I'm using more ceramics as a way to display my designs and kind of what I want to share. So I'm not really in it for the clay as much as I'm in it for the designs.
So you see it much more in a plane for surface as opposed to a volumetric form?
Yeah, because they wouldn't really work as a jug. They're here for decoration and more as an art piece rather than a function wear.
Yeah, we'll go around the back and see. Oh, we've turned it around now.
I want to swivel. Yeah, so I'll be swiveling it throughout because this is very one-sided what I'm doing. But yeah.
We'll go back. Don't worry. We can.
Need some knee pads, Ben. Sorry.
Rich, you started off in tile making?
Sorry?
You started in tile making?
I did start in tile making,
That's
really.
a big change from 2D to 3D, isn't it?
Yeah, completely. I mean, I would say 2D work isn't my happy place. I generally sort of see in 3 dimensions, and I feel much happier working directly into 3 dimensions as well. I kind of, I don't know. I've always sort of made stuff with my hands, and so even thinking through ideas, I'm more likely to make a maquette out of paper, using my hands as opposed to sort of working in the flat. But yeah, I think part of that was sort of being told at school. If you're told at school you can't draw, then you sort of feel very afraid about approaching that, and you sort of. But that's, that idea of convention, isn't it? That conventional drawing. So drawing is a lot of different things. But I tend to work directly into 3 dimensions on the whole.
Well, an awful lot of pupils going through school, they're okay until they reach an age when they start getting critical about their drawing and feel bad about it.
Yes.
Did you go through that kind of, and then move straight into 3D?
I think I'd probably already given up. It's funny. I do enjoy drawing. I do enjoy drawing now. It's something I've revisited with my daughter, because I think watching children, there's such joy in watching children draw, and trying to take that approach. I mean, was it Picasso that said he spent most of his life, after learning how to draw, spent most of his life trying to forget? I mean, it's all right if you're Picasso, isn't it? But it's So I do still draw, and I do enjoy it now. But then, I think much of what I do, as I say, is generally 3 dimensions, and I try ideas out directly in 3 dimensions. So, like the sprig molds and things like that, I'll often carve, and the crossovers between tiles and much of my work, there's real connection, So much of the press moulding and things like that traditionally that would have been used for encaustic tiles, I've kind of translated into using plaster as opposed to wood to make the relief surfaces, and then I press clay into them. So there's sort of lots of crossovers, I've always sort of thought that I kind of draw and experiment, directly into 3 dimensions, and in the clay, because ultimately, it's the qualities of the clay that I really like, so it sort of makes sense to work in that material. And I don't, strictly speaking, have decorative surfaces. I'm kind of terrified of even knowing where to begin, so I look at people like Bonnie working, and I'm just in awe.
You said that you sort of happened onto the tile business, but what did you do before that to have to be brave enough to tackle that? Where did you get your background from, the ceramic thing?
So I went to Farnham Art College. I was there. My tutor had Magdalena Dundo as my main tutor, and Claire Twomey and Gareth Mason, all of whom are incredible educators, incredible makers in their own right. And they just enthused me really about the material, and I just kind of, and they kind of encouraged me to kind of engage with the community, the ceramics community, and I thought. And ultimately, the ceramics community were the first group of people that I met where I didn't feel judged on the basis of what I looked like or who I was, and I just loved the people, and I just wanted to immerse myself, in that community. I feel quite emotional in that community as much as I did the material itself. So that kind of got me into it really. And as I say, I was never intending to run a tile company. I was just an opportunist who turned up at a site and wanted to take some equipment away. Yeah.
I think that's interesting, because I started off with sculpture and so on, and there's all this discussion between fine art versus the craft, but somehow the ceramic crowd always seem more willing to engage and accepting of where you are. And encouraging, always encouraging.
Completely. We're all fighting the same battle. We've all got the same challenges, and the heart of that rests with, working with mud.
We were saying last night that as I was watching everybody dancing like mad in the bar, that it would be hard to find a more inclusive community that you have. It's hard to think of any other creative discipline. Maybe you'll find it in writing, I think, and sometimes obviously music, but within the kind of fine and visual arts, you wouldn't probably see a bunch of fine artists dancing quite so closely.
No.
In quite such comfortable footwear, but but I do think it's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because it's frequently been seen as the sort of positive and negative of ceramics when they were really trying to academicize ceramic as a subject area. That very same inclusivity was seen to be a drawback in a sense, and I think it's the thing that's worth celebrating.
Absolutely.
So Bonnie, talk us through where you're at now, and do you, with the underglazes, obviously we've got kind of a rich array of marks on these jugs. Are you going to layer up underglazes with onglazes, or does pencil come into play?
So with this, I've just kind of quickly gone through all my colours, marking out where I wanted it. So some of these marks are very scruffy. I'll tidy them up after. So if this was bisqued, I would do all this, and then I'd go in with ceramic pencil, and I'd reintroduce those pencil marks. So I've kind of, on the paper here, I've kind of got my squiggles that I drew. I'll hold this one up. So yeah, I've got some drawings that I did quickly, taken from these, and this is kind of where I've gone, oh, I like some of these squiggles here. And then on here, I kind of drew out my template and roughly planned, although from that I've changed what I've done for this. I'll turn this around for everyone. I've changed my idea anyway, because I quite often find once you're actually touching the jug or on the surface, you go, oh, actually, that might not work. So yeah, it's just building up layers and then ceramic pen. I love a bit of a pencil mark on top as well.
And do you put on glaze on top of your glaze as well?
Yeah, so
Luster?
these will be fired, glazed, and then sometimes I add decals. So in the guest exhibition, I've got some of my coded text, so I add decals on top. And then as like a final nod to the Gaudy Welsh and all those, I add lusters on top as well. So I have about 4 firings.
4 or 5 firings.
Pieces, yeah. It takes a while.
Yeah, process. Question.
Just asking about the crowns and your inspiration. Is this a generic crown, or do you do lots of research into historical crowns?
So, is it a generic crown? Because you obviously make crowns.
Generic? No, I'm only joking. No, I'm only joking. No, so I do. Sorry, yeah.
That's
sorry.
right.
I do have, I guess, a routine that I tend to take. But then the thing I love about the crowns is the symbolism that's contained within them. So I usually try and, I mean, I've brought fleur-de-lis here, you know, but yeah, I do play around with some of the sort of press-molded elements that I add in, and they relate to then, yeah, usually sort of different stories. But yeah, I mean, in terms of sort of using a bag tie to create a handle, which it becomes an arm, I also use extrusions to do that, to create the arms. But yeah, I guess I do have a similar routine, to the process of making, but then each piece generally becomes sort of unique with the imagery that I kind of incorporate into it, if that makes sense. But yeah, it's I'm still kind of figuring out where they're going, really, you know, because I'm learning all the time. So it's kind of and making more press molds. I mean, all of the press molds I carved from leather hard clay and then cast in ceramicast plaster. And that is an ever-growing library of forms, and so I keep kind of adding bits in all the time. So on the whole, the routine I would say is the same at the moment. But then equally, it's like all of us. You're making one thing, and you're already sort of thinking about the next thing. So, yeah, I don't know if that. Maybe one day. I don't know. They have me at the moment, but yeah, no, I do research because that idea of rule throughout the world. I mean, I do research crowns from all over the world. I've done a lot of research into kind of African crowns, West African crowns. And they differ so radically. Where we place value, what we place value on. I mean, I often talk. Well, I say I often talk. I'm talking about crowns all the time. But you look at the symbolism within the crowns, the stones, the materials, where they've come from. They tell stories. And you look out across the world, and there's feather crowns. There's a lot of the West African crowns are big, heavy gold crowns. They speak of the place. They speak of what's valued in that place, and they speak of the kind of the wealth, what is associated with the material wealth of that place. So, yeah, I kind of pick up on imagery that kind of feels relevant to the story, but I'm fascinated by all royal regalia, and not just crowns, things that kind of revolve around that section of society, that kind of felt like a different world, to me growing up.
Can I point out that Rich doesn't skip a beat in making when he's talking? The pace does not change when he's talking, and it's really interesting when you see people on the stage, because frequently you ask a question and they stop to answer and the making stops. But I think a bulldozer wouldn't stop you.
It's 20 years of working in a tile workshop where people wander in and you've got a lot of stuff to do in a day. You kind of, if you stop, you...
the brain going.
Yeah, completely. It's like... the rhythm of the sound and the rhythm of my childhood was my mum knitting, and she would just you'd have really in-depth conversations, to clack, 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 you know. And so there's something lovely about that kind of muscle memory and just working through, talking whilst making. But
and Molly, you're in Fireworks, aren't you?
Yes,
in Fireworks Studio in Cardiff, fantastic studio, ceramic studio for those who don't know it.
Very lucky.
And that's a real community, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Quite often, because I work with headphones in and I'm on the weekend, I'm not sure when anyone's around, so sometimes someone will pop in and all of a sudden I'll be like, oh my gosh, I'm going to quickly grab the jugs just in case it falls. But no, it is a fantastic place, and I've learned so much just being there and just talking to the people there, because they've got such a wealth of knowledge. So it's like going back to uni and being with people who know these things, and every now and then I'll run over to someone and go like, is this how you do this? And yeah.
Rich, one of the things I noticed about your work is the precision that seems to feature in everything. And yesterday you were just commenting on your bowls.
yeah, it's bad, isn't it? I've got to be careful now where I talk about weighing my balls, really. Weighing my balls, rolling my balls. There's probably something in that, Jim, you know.
But no, what was the set of scales?
Sorry?
It's the set of scales that are beside you.
Yes, they've weighed a lot of balls over the years.
Yeah, but you said down to 3 decimal points?
Yeah, on the whole, yeah. So, I mean, on the whole, I'm usually kind of to 1 decimal point if I'm just kind of making something ordinarily. But if I'm kind of tapering away, sometimes down a crown, I'll taper away to nothing, you know, or to 0.0.
So you weigh the individual amounts and reduce them to get the precise...
Yeah,
This must be from the regimented demands of tile and reproduction and being able to duplicate exactly what goes on.
Completely, yeah. Strict military upbringing can do that to you. It's like, you know, I'm the person that if you've got to be there at 10 o'clock, I'm outside at 7:30, you know. Yeah. But yeah, I do enjoy, you know, part of me would love to be just free and just, you know, but, you know, just kind of free with the material and work with it in a very loose way. But, yeah, you know, the tile making, I don't know whether it's that's kind of beaten that out of me, or because everything with that is so regimented. Or maybe it's, you know, I take pleasure in symmetry and in monotony in production. So, yeah, it's kind of, I think the less tiles I've made, the more anal I've become about kind of, being sort of fairly strict and fairly tight with the work, you know. But I long to be just free, you know, writhing around in the material.
We've had a question just about the figurative pieces up in the exhibition space of the men standing on the rocks.
Oh, where am I? This person right here. Oh,
yeah, there you go.
God, that's really weird. Don't know which way to put it. There? No, here? Where's that then?
Your proto-perception will all be off now for the rest
That's
of the day.
so weird. There we go.
It's that camera there.
That's what I thought, but no, I think it's over there. Is it over there? I don't know. That's so strange. I apologise. Anyway, you can't see it anyway. But yeah, he's a little man, a 2-piece press mould that I've got here, and he's, I guess, my muse, really. He's called Hondo McLean. He was a black crime-fighting historian from a cartoon called Mask. If you blinked in the 1980s, you probably missed it because it was only on for 1 series. But it was like the light in the dark, you know. He was an equal part of a crime-fighting team, and he had a job that was valid. You know, I loved history as a kid, and he was the first person who I guess was in a positive and important role that I saw on telly, because you know. It was, I was really kind of into cartoons as a child, just as you do, switch off. You're just desperate for any screen time when you're a kid. And but I didn't see many people reflected back at me that, you know, I loved the A-Team, so, you know, I could have been a really angry, very heavily laden with lots of jewellery if he hadn't come along, if Hondo hadn't come along. But yeah, he was just and I begged and begged and begged to get one of the action figures of him. And the day that I got it, I just felt absolutely blown away. Absolutely, just And he's sort of featured as part of a lot of my work, really, both in positive and very negative ways, because it was just that sort of, as I've grown up, I've sort of thought how lucky I was that, I actually found him at the time that I did, and he was unusual. He was unique in the society I was living in. But had he been born 150 years earlier, he'd have been an enslaved person, But actually now, and I think it was something about the fact that the program was called Mask, and they all put masks on, and they became, anonymous, and they went out and fought crimes. And I just wanted to be in the background when I was a kid. It sounds like a therapy session. I'm so sorry. You're here to learn about clay, but I was so visible where I was because of the way I looked. I just didn't want to be seen, which is ironic, really. Now I'm on the telly, So he kind of was the first positive representation of a black male. That I had, really, because even BA, although he was an equal part of the A-team, they still gave him milk so that they could get him on. He was still he wasn't an equal member of the team. In case you haven't seen the A-team, but yeah.
I've got another question. Yeah. Oh, Bonnie, a question: do you ever dilute your underglazes?
No, I like solid blocks of colour, but with like the reds and like the purple, anything with red involved, right, basically, once you glaze them, they do kind of wash out anyway. So I could play with that. So sometimes if there's like with these jugs here, you get like a solid colour and then it goes into lighter colour. So when I'm painting these, I'll do the top very heavy, like 3 layers, then I'll go down to 2, and then I'll just go down to 1. So it naturally does that process anyway. So instead of watering them down myself, I let the kiln decide what it's going to look like.
Thank you.
What have I done?
And you give equal importance to both sides of...
Yeah, so sometimes you can tell when I'm a bit rushed or a bit stressed because maybe one side's quite got done on the colour, and then I'll look to the other side when it's come out of the kiln and I go, oh no, I only did 2 on that one and I did 3 on this, so this is the good side and that's the bad side.
Another question here?
Did you ever experience any stress fractures because of the arching and the weight at the top?
Technical question. Do you get problems with stress fracturing from the weights on the top and the structural thinness of all these pieces that you're putting
on the whole, no. I've kind of developed a clay body that seems to be reasonably able to take the abuse that I'm giving it, Sorry?
Now, oh, yeah.
Oh,
we can move straight on to the technical.
Planted question.
As a tile maker, you must have developed a lot of clay bodies or worked with a lot of different clay.
I have, and that was one thing with the tiles that was lovely, particularly the collaborative work, because people would come in and we'd have to kind of use a clay body that was relevant to what, they were using. So particularly when we were acting as capacity for other makers, very often, we'd be sort of... using their techniques, glazes, clays, so I've experienced a lot of different bodies, but I've actually now, for the tiles, I have got a clay body with pot clays. As I said yesterday, I'm not on a commission, but I use a mix of 2 bodies. There's a body called Sublico, or I might be saying that wrong, Sublico, but there's a black clay body that's made with body stains as opposed to oxides, so it stays beautifully rich and dark and black, but it's not very plastic, so I tend to blend that down with a naturally occurring high-fired red stoneware from Burgundy, which is so incredibly plastic. It's beautiful. It's like a brick clay. I used to dig a brick clay from Pitcham in Midhurst that I used to use from a company called Lamb's Terracotta. Unfortunately, it is no more, like so many of these brick companies in the southeast. But I used to use that, and I used to blend that with other bodies because it had a lovely plasticity to it. But I mix those 2 bodies purely because there's so much naturally occurring iron in the red stoneware that it doesn't then saturate the black. It doesn't remove the blackness of the black clay body, but it kind of introduces the working properties that I'm after. And you can really abuse it, you know. I do dry them slowly. And generally speaking, most of my process sort of, I guess, the kind of managing of components sits at the heart of it. So I've got a lot of these boxes with plaster cast in the bottom, and I'll kind of top those up with water or not to kind of bring everything to a similar consistency. Because often, you know, if you have troubles with kind of attaching things or elements kind of drying out unevenly, it's, you know, usually the consistency of the components. So I find, as most of us do, you know, I'm unwrapping things, boxing things up, unboxing things, moving them around, drying them a bit, putting them back in. But yeah, I will say I have had failures, a lot of failures over the years, you know. I'd be lying if I didn't, you know, and that still happens. But that's usually because I'm pushing things just a bit too far, and then you learn to just kind of step it back a stage and, you know, or you develop routes, you know, out of that problem. But on the whole, in answer to your question, after a long rambling, I don't tend to have that many issues with fractures or stress cracks now. I try to keep a reasonably similar thickness throughout the entire body. So this thrown element to the sprig molded elements that I'm adding on to the profile of the handles, although they're very different forms and they're attached in very fine ways, they're usually a similar sort of thickness throughout.
Did you twig the fact that he's got plaster in the bottom of his plastic bucket there, that you wet to a consistency? You talk about careful preparation and careful maintenance and careful moisture control from start to finish.
Yeah.
You probably have fewer cracks than the rest of us working in a dusty studio spontaneously, you know, and instantly gratification after, you know, I want to do it now, and I don't want to have to wait for all these things to get to the same moisture content or whatever. There's a lot of care and thought going into every
Absolutely.
bit of that.
Yeah, that's one thing tiles teaches you, is to be sensitive to the material, because they are an absolute pain in the arse.
They curl, don't they?
They curl, yeah, at the drop of a hat. So, you know, it teaches you to be sensitive to the drying conditions and to the studio conditions, and to how you treat the material through that bit of the process. So, yeah, it's, you know, and even with the tiles, there were many occasions that I didn't get it right, you know, so many occasions.
Another question here?
With your tiles, did you put a weight on top of them to dry?
When
you're trying to keep your tiles flat, did you weight them down? What was your secret for keeping tiles flat?
Oh, the secrets. So really, all I used ultimately was 9mm plasterboard, 12mm plasterboard if it was a big tile, and there was sufficient weight purely in that board. I mean, it's, yeah. With tiles, it really depends on what the tile looks like and what it is you're making, the material you're making it from. Because we've made, you know, over the years, we made things from stained porcelain that were unglazed, that were 6mm thick, through to heavily grogged relief tiles that were, you know, 20mm thick, through to, and every single type of tile presents a different challenge. But on the whole, if you're just making a fairly bog standard tile, I would say 9mm plasterboard is what you want at hand in your studio. If you can have some kind of slatted racking, then fabulous, because you want to sandwich the tiles between two pieces of plasterboard for a couple of days, and you'll find there's that moment when the clay just goes off. It's not leather hard, it's not even cheese hard, it's just gone off, it's started to become firm. And at that moment, we would then either remove the top plasterboard, or we'd move them onto slatted racking, depending on what they are, because it's just about airflow. You know, naturally, the moisture is going to come off the top far more quickly than it does the bottom. And on the whole, you just need to treat the top and the bottom the same with a tile in order to keep it flat. And obviously, that's outside of good making practices, because if you're putting in memory into the clay, you can't get out of that by effective drying. So yeah, it's really just managing the whole process from the very beginning. And I think all too often those processes are so overlooked. People think, oh, it's just a flat piece of clay. I'll make a flat piece of clay. But it is, you know, This feels like child play after making tiles, you know.
This
I suppose
morning,
you pick up a flat piece of clay, it remembers it's been bent, doesn't it?
I'm sorry?
If you pick up a flat piece of clay and it curves, it remembers it's been bent, and it
Undoubtedly.
go like that way.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And just simple things like when you're cutting a tile, cutting through a slab, the pressure from the knife onto the surface is enough to bond it to that surface so that if you leave it in that position to dry, you know, certain areas might stick and it'll peel up and away. So, you know, things like once you've cut the tile out, you move it onto a fresh board so that everything, you know, is treated the same. Things like the way you cut through, you know, you don't just slice through like this. You maybe go, you know, 2/3 of the way through, and then you come back in the other direction, so you're not pulling the clay away from the corner, which would cause it to twist out. So there's lots of nuance to every aspect of the process, yeah.
Nick Lee said in the session earlier, which is sort of so self-evident, but I've never thought about it in such a way. He said 90% of ceramic practice is moisture control.
Yeah.
And when you think about it, that's so true, isn't it? Because in everything we do, whether it's slip or plastic clay or throwing or whatever, it's about not understanding the moisture control.
Absolutely. It's no coincidence that, you know, the commercial factories moved to dust pressing. They just removed that moisture out of the process because ultimately it's our biggest issue, you know.
But it's everything, isn't it? Glaze application, everything.
Yeah.
Understanding moisture control.
I visited a tile factory that was, you know, I think it's 95% dry, isn't it? And they were 18 inches across and fired in 30 minutes, you know, in a tunnel kiln.
Wow.
Most of the materials were from the Negev Desert, which is not a good place to be right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's extraordinary what technological advancement has done for the tile industry. I mean, it's astounding. Yeah.
Another question here.
Rich, I was going to ask, do you ever go home after pottery throwdown and get out your comfort zone and try any of the challenges yourself?
Do you ever try to do the challenges that the pottery throwdown contestants have to endure?
Do you know what? The throwdown as an environment is inspirational in so many ways, and it's definitely kind of filtered into, so like my plan this summer is to make a hellmouth pizza oven, you know, because I'm not sure I need a hellmouth fireplace in the living room. But I think the thing it encourages me to do, as you know, I probably said it yesterday, I don't know, I say it to everybody, but you know, just seeing the potters go into an environment, you know, I've been doing it a fair amount of time. There's many makers in here that have been doing it a lot longer than me, and I feel like even in that environment, if I was doing the challenges, I would find it a grueling process because it tests so many different aspects of the discipline. And as you know, you're only in that situation one crack away from, you know, being you know, churned out. But
and the time factor is such an important thing too.
Completely. We're working right on the cusp of what's feasible with the material, you know. So I just feel inspired by the individuals who choose to do that and choose to kind of put themselves out there, have the bravery to do that. And it, without a shadow of a doubt, it's encouraged me to be more brave in my own practice, you know, because you can't help but be inspired by that. You know, I know how hard it is. We all know how hard it is. And so to be brave enough to, when it's not necessarily your every day, not something that you're pursuing all the time, to go out and say, well, this is me, this is how I do it, and this, you know, is so inspiring. So I don't do many of the challenges because I guess time is an issue, and I kind of want to focus my energies into making what I'm most passionate about. But yeah, it does filter in things, and just, you know, you see kind of little, I'm a bit of a tool fiend, so, you know, you see the odd tool here and there, and you're like, oh, that's interesting, I might try one of those, or, you know, and so yeah, like all these things, when you're in a pool of creative people, you get snippets and tidbits, and you get as much back as you give, type of thing. So yeah, I don't know how that answers your question, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go on. For tile making, is it, do they stay flat better if they're slabbed first or simply pressed?
Yeah, so all of the different types of making processes definitely have a bearing on the kind of management you have to give. And we would use hydraulic ram presses. I had a beautiful 60-ton Simkin ram press from Morgan Hall. extraordinary machine, amazing potter, and so we would use that. And obviously 60 tons of pressure, it's aligning those platelets of clay. They're very dense, and you can abuse those a bit more than if you've maybe extruded a tile. But then you extrude a tile, and somehow it would remember the direction of the auger, of the spline, so you'd have...
Does soft clay being pressed into a mold hold its shape better than being slabbed? Yeah.
In terms of soft clay pressed into a mold, if you're pressing into plaster molds, in terms of the specific issues with that, it depends how you're removing the excess clay. So whether you're harping off the back or whether you're striking off the back with a stick. So, you know, like I could take a mold like this, and I would take a stick and I would strike off the back. So that's like how they'd make bricks. So you would find a way, you know, there's nuance in the way you do that. So for example, because this has got edges on the top surface, if I went like this down that, you know, all of these edges would pull away from the plaster. So a mold like this, for example, I'd strike off from the center and I'd go round and out like this. And that would stop there being any kind of, you know, pressure on those external edges. So, you know, in terms of what you're doing, whatever activity you're doing, it's very much about laying foundations that make the drying aspect easier. And that's particular to the type of thing that you're making. So as I say, with an extruder, you're trying to counteract the spline. With the ram press, you're trying to counteract the downward pressure. You know, with a mold, you're trying to counteract the fact that you're taking the excess off the back in a particular way. So yeah, you know, it potentially, the challenges are all still there, however you choose to do it. It's just about mitigating those issues further down by really good, solid making practices in the early stages. And it can be as nuanced as the way you remove the excess material.
And then the everlasting issue of how quickly you dry it and whether it's between things and, you know.
So if you've got any other technical questions, I'm sure Rich and Bonnie will be able to answer them in their spaces, but we're out of time now for this demonstration, so show your appreciation. Thank you for that. And I do want to end on time because Joe Finch is now opening his kiln on the chapel court at 11:30, selling his